My name is Bill Irwin. I'm 36 years old, and I own my own business. A building contractor. My business is not big. Just 4 employees, including an accountant and an old barn that stores equipment, building materials, and a small office. My wife, Sarah, works as a licensed real estate broker for a local firm and does quite well at it. I, on the other hand, primarily build luxury custom homes, which are always in demand despite the ups and downs of the economy. The two of us make well over 6 figures annually. Sarah is my age. We went to high school together and graduated in '79. We started dating in junior high, and in senior year, we had our first sex. It was the usual unsatisfying fiddling since we were both virgins. But as they say, practice makes perfect. So by senior year, we were getting pretty good at it. Her parents were sympathetic and put her on birth control. We found out that we both liked sex, and she especially liked riding my pole cowboy style. The backseat of my old car took a lot of damage. It wasn't obvious at the time. Although we thought we loved each other, it was just lust. We both enjoyed sex and felt comfortable doing it with each other, to the exclusion of everyone else. I'd like to point out that Sarah was a late bloomer and didn't start acquiring those admirable feminine qualities, such as breasts and figure, until junior high school when we started going out together. When she began to develop, it was like watching a rose emerge from its bud into the sunlight. And I, like most guys, was very grateful for the result. I was certainly glad I discovered it first. In her senior year, a lot of guys started hitting on her, but, unused to the lustful attention from the postal population, she chose to stay with me, apparently for protection. By the time we graduated, she was enjoying her newfound popularity and, to my horror, began flirting with other guys. However, we knew our relationship would end when we graduated from high school. She was going to attend her father's alma mater, an out-of-state university, because her family could afford out-of-state tuition. My folks were not as affluent, nor was I as academically inclined, so I was going to attend the local community college to major in small business management. My father was a carpenter, and I enjoyed working with him on construction jobs during summer vacations, but he wanted me to go into business for myself. Anyway, she left for college and the breakup was hard, because we were used to having sex pretty often and thought we loved each other. I tried to visit her on weekends in my old car, but gradually we drifted apart. I didn't see her too often for about 4 years, until we ran into each other at one of the CW bars in a town I liked to visit. There was line dancing as well as music I liked, and I met a lot of girls there. I was making good money working in the construction industry at the time, gaining experience and doing minor repairs and remodeling on the weekends in preparation for starting my own business. I was standing with my buddy Drew at the long-necked bud bar when Drew, who was facing the door, nudged me and gestured for me to look behind me. Drew and I were still in high school, and he knew about my previous relationship with Sarah. Looking over my shoulder, I saw her. Sarah was standing near the door with 2 other girls, looking around the room. I guess they were here for the first time and were checking out the surroundings like we all do when we find ourselves in new territory. She looked amazing. And my cock twitched at the sight of that gorgeous body in the tight jeans and t-shirt I'd enjoyed in my last year of high school. It had only gotten better with age. Suddenly, as she looked over the bar, I saw recognition appear on her face, and a smile lit up her face as she headed towards me, inviting her friends to follow her. "Bill, it's been a long time," she said as she put her arms around me and kissed my cheek. I felt those gorgeous breasts pressed against my chest, and my cock throbbed in my pants again. "It's good to see you again, Sarah," I said, hugging her enthusiastically. "You remember Drew, don't you?" "Sure, hi Drew. These are my friends, Sally and Remy." Sally was a tall, slender redhead, and Remy was a perky, well-developed blonde. Both girls seemed a little nervous about being in the CW bar dance hall. "Hey guys, would you like a table?" I asked, trying to put them at ease. Heading to a table near the dance floor, I noticed that every guy in the place was following us with their eyes. Once seated, I caught the eye of one of the waitresses and ordered us each a round of drinks. Drew waved for his buddy to join us, and we were quickly engaged in a new round of introductions before the drinks arrived. Sarah and I started telling each other about events that had happened in our lives over the past 4 years. As we talked, I felt myself reacting to her in a way I'd never reacted to any other girl, and in the back of my mind, I was humming, "This is the one. This is the one. This is the one. This is the one." I think she heard it too, because she put her hand on my arm and didn't let go as we talked. I learned that she had just graduated and had taken a job with one of the big real estate firms in town. She was in a training program and hoped to get her license within the next year. Sally and Remy were friends from college and were visiting for the weekend. Sally admitted that this was their first time at the CW bar, but they had heard it was a good place to meet guys and decided to give it a try. Squeezing my hand and looking into my eyes, she told me, "I'm glad we decided to come here." "I'm just as glad, Sarah," I replied. The rest of the evening we danced and talked. Other guys tried to cut in, but she just told them no and stayed next to me, holding hands if we weren't dancing. It was obvious that we were about to become a couple. I was now living in my own apartment, and later that night we all went there where we partied together for a while and then the others left. Drew winked at me as he left under the arm of Remy. They seemed to get along really well that night. That night was the beginning of our long-term relationship. The sex was as good as it had been during our high school years, and Sarah admitted that she had been intimate with several guys in college, but she thought I was the best lover. She never wanted to discuss her college years, and I didn't really want to know. I was so in love with her by then that I didn't want to know anything that would disrupt that feeling of euphoria that surged through me when I was with her. Besides, I was not averse to being naughty myself, so I couldn't blame her for what I had done. Of course, I'd had sex with other girls, and I'd learned a few things. An older woman had taught me the joys of oral sex, and I was already quite adept at pussy work. When Sarah and I had sex as teenagers, we humped like rabbits. But as our new relationship began, love became part of the mix as our more experienced intimacies blossomed into a solid relationship. We often went out together with Drew and Remy. They had also started dating, and being mutual friends, it seemed appropriate for us to hang out together. I wasn't surprised when they announced their engagement a few months after meeting. I felt like my relationship with Sarah and I was almost at that point, and I was about to buy her an engagement ring. I talked to Drew about the possibility of a double wedding, but Drew told me that Remy wanted to have the wedding in her hometown where her parents still lived. He informed me that Remy admitted that while she, Sarah, and Sally were in college, they were fraternity favorites on campus because of their willingness to participate in group activities of a sexual nature. He didn't elaborate, but I understood. He said Remy wanted to start married life without fear that one day someone would come along who would find out about her past and try to take advantage of it. Drew said he was more than satisfied with her promise to remain faithful to him and their marriage in the future. I was surprised at Sarah's lack of candor about her past, but remembering my own past love life, I decided not to continue talking to her about what I had learned. Still, it bothered me, as my story seemed modest compared to hers, and I had a few anxious moments before our wedding when I remembered what Drew had told me. When I finally proposed, Sarah was ecstatic. We were at Outback Steakhouse in a secluded booth drinking coffee after a hearty dinner when I pulled out a small box containing the ring. Her eyes went wide when she saw it, and when I opened the box and saw the engagement ring I had chosen, she squealed with delight. Some of the other customers who could see our booth smiled as I slipped the ring on her finger and proposed. "Sarah, will you be my wife?" "Oh yes, yes I will! I am so excited! Yes, my darling, I will be your wife!" she exclaimed as I walked around the table and moved towards her, enclosing her in my arms. We kissed to the applause of those around us as more of the customers and staff realized what had just happened. We were slightly embarrassed as we broke the embrace and nodded to those around us. The scrutiny on us soon subsided and we sat together, sipping coffee and talking softly. Occasionally, a waiter came by and refilled our cups, but otherwise we were alone in our own world, exchanging loving kisses. I don't know why, but what Drew had told me about Sarah, Remy, and Sally suddenly came to mind, and I thought this would be a good time to assert my position on fidelity in our marriage. "Sarah," I said, kissing her lightly on the lips, "you realize this is forever. I'm committing myself to you for as long as I live. There will be no other. I love you too, Bill, and I will until the day I die. We're forever, and there will never be anyone else for me." She returned my kiss, lightly at first, and then I felt the tip of her tongue touch my lips for a brief second. It was enough to make my cock reflexively surge with the promise that touch held. That night, we swore our allegiance to each other, and I knew that our wedding would be just a formality to be in. I felt peaceful, and I hoped I could put an end to the stray, doubting thoughts that teased me from time to time. About 4 months later, our wedding took place, and we traveled to Maui to honeymoon for a week. Then we went back to work building my business, and she went back to her job. Of course, she had moved in with me a few weeks before, so there wasn't much change in our existence now that we were husband and wife. When we were together, we indulged in love and lust, and any doubts I might have had dissolved in our passion and devotion to each other. When we got married, we set ourselves the goal of continuing to live in an apartment, and in 5 years we would save up money and build our own house and then think about parenthood. It only took 4 years and we had our own house, and a year later, our first child was born, a girl we named Betsy Ann after her mother. 2 years later, we had a son, and we named him Jason Michael in honor of our fathers. While the children were young, Sarah cut back on her work hours to become a stay-at-home mom. Sarah had always been a health freak, and after having children, she had immersed herself in physical fitness and managed to maintain the figure she had when we married. She was still a sexy woman and tried to dress accordingly. Sometimes it was awkward to go out in public with her and watch the other guy's reaction. Life was good. Our family life revolved around our 2 children, and the rest was about starting my business. Even though we had been married for several years, my love for Sarah was as strong as the day I decided that she was the one. Our sex life may have suffered a bit, but I felt that the frequency of our intimacy was more than adequate. At any rate, I had the impression that she returned my love and was satisfied with our bedroom activities. Every now and then, I remembered Remy telling Drew about her and Sarah's promiscuous sex life in college, and not being a guy who likes nasty surprises, discreetly checked her out, but never found anything that hinted at any indecency. Of course, working as a real estate saleswoman, she was free to choose her genre of work and hours that I couldn't keep track of. But that was fine with me. The social aspect of our lives involved a close bond with Drew and Remy as our best friends. We had other acquaintances, of course, but we socialized almost exclusively with them. We organized our vacations together and met up frequently throughout the month. Friday night was always a dinner date, followed by dancing at one of the best clubs in town. Drew and Remy had 2 kids a couple years older than ours, but they enjoyed playing with ours, so summer backyard barbecues were happy times. A couple times a year, I traveled overseas to a builder's convention to keep up with the latest trends in new materials and appointments to help sell a luxury home. I was always glad that Sarah could turn to Drew if she had a problem while I was away. Drew worked as an electrician for a local contractor, and I would occasionally engage him for work. I considered hiring him myself, but decided that being his boss might interfere with our friendship. Remy worked in the administrative department of the local hospital as an assistant administrator, and I think she hoped to take over the administrator's position someday when he retired. She was a very smart woman, and I thought how lucky Drew was to have married her, even though she had put on a few pounds after having children. Near the age of 30, Sarah started hinting that she wanted to go off the birth control pill. And since we had decided that we weren't going to have any more children, one of us should fix ourselves so that pregnancy wouldn't bother us anymore. Besides, she said, I'm constantly worried about the long-term effects of taking them. And Remy told me that Drew had a vasectomy and feels much better without taking them. Okay, honey, I have to go to a builder's convention in Omaha City next week. I'll think about it and give you an answer when I get back. My buddy Drew did it. I'll have to talk to him and see what's what. Before we go to the convention, I thought, thank you, Bill. I'll really appreciate your understanding. Tonight, I'll show you how much I appreciate it. And she did. A couple days later, I had a chance to talk to Drew about his vasectomy. And after listening to him and his experience, I decided that I would go ahead and have it done as well. I didn't tell Sarah, however. Since it was such a simple outpatient procedure, I would surprise Sarah and have it done while I was at the convention. With that thought in mind, I said goodbye to my family a few days later and headed to Omaha for a convention. Sarah was a little worried as she didn't like sleeping alone, but we calmed each other down by saying, "Love you," kissed goodbye, and I left. In Omaha, I looked through the yellow pages in my hotel room and found a doctor who advertised a quick, painless, scalpel-free vasectomy and called his office. I was encouraged that he had an appointment available for the next day, which would be for an initial exam. When I explained that I was only in town for a couple days and was doing this as a surprise for my wife, the receptionist assured me that if everything went well at the initial appointment, she could schedule me for the procedure the next day. This sounded satisfactory, and I made an appointment for the next morning. I went to bed that night in good spirits, even after my late-night phone call to Sarah had gone well, and thought how happy she would be when she could stop taking birth control pill. I didn't sleep well that night, thinking about surgery, and after a light breakfast I went to the doctor's office, which was in a medical office complex nearby. After filling out all the forms, including my medical history, a nurse measured my blood pressure, weighed me and took a blood sample, and then after a short wait, the doctor entered the small exam room. He was an older gentleman who understood my nervousness and immediately put me at ease, explaining that the procedure was very simple and I would be given a local anesthetic, making it relatively painless. Drew told me roughly the same thing, but I was still a little nervous that someone would be handling my most sensitive and valuable appendage, but decided to take the risk anyway. He told me that it was common for patients to submit a spermogram before surgery to have a baseline for comparison later, so he needed me to submit a sample before I left the office. I wasn't expecting this, indeed. I had never given it much thought, but his nurse seemed to be serious about it as she took me into a small room, handed me a sample bottle, and said as I entered, You'll find everything you need here. Then closed the door, leaving me isolated inside. Looking around the room, I saw a small TV with DVD capability, a stack of DVDs, various men's magazines, and a lazy boy chair. With the help of a Playboy hottie who looked like Sarah, I quickly accomplished my goal and, leaving the sample bottle on the designated shelf, returned to the exam room. The doctor returned to me a few minutes later and informed me that there was a lab in the medical complex and he would have them expedite the analysis of my blood and semen samples. He asked me to leave a phone number where I could be reached, but if I didn't hear from him, I should come to his office for a procedure the next morning. I left my cell phone number with the nurse and headed to the conference center. Later in the afternoon, I received a call on my cell phone from the doctor that made me very upset. After introducing himself, the doctor told me about the results of my semen analysis. Mr. Irwin, I have to tell you that your test results are negative. You do not need a vasectomy since you are already infertile. You are not producing sperm in sufficient quantities for you to have a chance of producing children. Needless to say, I was shocked for a few moments before I could respond. How can that be? According to the medical history you filled out, you had mumps as a child. That could be the cause of your condition. I remember that it was only a mild case of the disease. Would that have been enough to render me infertile? I can't say, Mr. Irwin, but you can confirm our findings with your doctor when you get home. In the meantime, I've canceled your appointment for tomorrow, as I don't think surgery makes sense in your case. Let us know if there is anything more we can do for you. Thank you, doctor. I hung up the phone, my mind still a swirl of confused thoughts. And then it hit me. If I was infertile, who was Betsy and Jason's father? Before I did anything, I had to get home and make sure I was infertile. I didn't want to make a mistake that would destroy my family. Knowing I couldn't work until I got confirmation, I immediately called and changed my plane reservations to go home tonight. I arrived at our home airport around 9:30 that evening, picked up my car in the parking lot, and checked into a nearby motel. After calming down, I did some thinking and strategizing and decided not to go home until I confirmed my infertility. If I went home sooner, I would have to explain the reason why, and I didn't want to arouse Sarah's suspicions until I was sure. The next day, I went to the local clinic and had my sperm tested. I didn't want to resort to our family doctor in case word got out to Sarah somehow. After going through the registration process, I was given another sample bottle and escorted to a room where I finally relieved myself by taking a sufficient sample. The clinic told me that it usually takes 2 days to get the results, and I said I would pay extra to speed up the process. I was told that the sample was being analyzed at a lab a few miles away, but if I wanted, they could forward it and get the results the next day. I asked them to act as quickly as possible and gave them my cell phone number, strictly stating that I could only be contacted on it. I had to return the next day to collect the test results and pay the bill. I spent the rest of the day in my motel room to minimize the likelihood of being noticed by friends or acquaintances who might mention it to Sarah. I had dinner at the diner next door, and when it got dark, I decided to see what Sarah was up to while she thought I was out of town. I thought about what Remy had told Drew about her and Sarah's college years, and wondered if that had affected what had happened with Sarah. Maybe she'd gotten bored with our marital lovemaking and decided to expand it. Having had a taste of wild sex in college, she couldn't forget it anymore. I drove up to our house and parked on the street to watch who was coming and going. The sky was threatening, and lightning could be seen in the distance. From the direction of the wind, it looked like it was headed this way. I usually called around 7 in the evening when I was out of town, and I was about to call my cell phone at the usual time when I saw Drew's car pull up in my driveway. I couldn't see who was driving, but I assumed it was Drew. I wondered what had happened that she had to call him. But then I saw the garage door go up, and he pulled into my parking space. I watched the garage door close behind him with a growing certainty that my best friend had been cheating on me for years. Before I let my rage build, I should have known for sure. I would try not to judge him until I knew for sure. But something in my life was seriously wrong, and I felt like I was getting closer to figuring it out. Was Drew the father of my children? I would have to establish paternity if it was confirmed that I was infertile, so I had to be careful about that until I was sure. Before I made any move, I thought it best to end the conversation at 7 p.m. So I called home. Sarah answered almost immediately. "Hi, honey. You're just in time. How are you?" Trying to keep my voice normal, I replied. "Things are going pretty well. I haven't seen a lot of new stuff, but I've been able to deal with the new tile, which looks interesting. Bring me a sample if it looks good. I'm thinking of remodeling the guest bathroom." "Good. How's it going in there?" "Great. The kids are at my parents' house for the night. They wanted to take them with them for the night. It must be very lonely out there by yourself. Are you nervous?" I had to do some digging because I knew Drew was in there. No, I'll set off the security alarm and everything will be fine. I wish you were here, but I think I hear thunder. Sleep well in this lonely bed. I'll talk to you tomorrow night. Bye. Interrupting her, I wondered if she had noticed or that I hadn't told her, I love you. I had to be careful until I got confirmation of my infertility the next day. It wouldn't be good if I snapped and ruined a good marriage with false accusations. However, the proof was already there. Drew had been at our house with Sarah for over half an hour. The fact that they wanted his car out of sight when he arrived was evidence of more than just a clogged sink. I continued to sit and watch my house as the storm approached, and I began to think and plan some things. It was starting to look like Drew might be the father of our children if I ended up infertile. That meant she had been cuckolding me for at least 6 years, maybe more. The fact that she had gotten pregnant by another man indicated that she must have very little respect for me. Of course, if she didn't know I was infertile and assumed it could be my children, that meant she was having sex with Drew or someone else in the nude, without caring that she might get pregnant. And that was just as disrespectful as the first option, so there was no way our marriage was going to survive. The funny thing is, I never noticed this disrespect during our years of marriage, and either she was a very good actress, or she really loved me, but could separate from that love and have sex with someone else, and even risk getting pregnant by them. If the test shows that I'm infertile, I should take DNA samples from Betsy and Jason and compare them to my DNA and Drew's. I'll have to get his sample somehow. With the information from these tests, I will be able to confront Sarah and possibly get answers as to why. I need this to consummate my marriage. It had been 2 hours since I'd seen Drew enter our house, and the rain was starting to intensify as the storm approached. I realized it was time to make a choice. Do I go into the house and confront Sarah and Drew, or wait for the test results? I decided to go and wait for the test results, but so far the evidence just seemed to be killer. Besides, I really wanted to pee, but I couldn't see anything that could save our marriage. She cuckolded me for years and gave me her lover's children to raise. Tomorrow, I would check my sperm test results and take action if they confirmed my inability to fertilize. Waiting for the DNA testing of the children was useless. I just wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. I had about 15 hours to plan my actions, and when I was sure, I acted quickly and decisively. The next afternoon, I was sitting in my motel room sluggishly watching TV when my cell phone rang. Mr. Irwin? Yes, this is Bill Irwin. Mr. Irwin, we received your test results from the lab. Would you like to get the results over the phone or come to the clinic? Tell me now, and I'll stop by later and pick up a copy of the report. It appears that you are essentially infertile, Mr. Irwin. Your sperm count is practically non-existent. Thank you, that's all I need to know. I'll be there soon to get a copy. Okay, we're open until 6 p.m. And then it happened. I had to accept that my marriage was over. I couldn't live with a woman who had so subtly disrespected me and become a cuckold. The children I thought were mine now belonged to someone else. It was time to see a lawyer, close the accounts, and do all the things one does when contemplating divorce. Further thoughts of a DNA test were dismissed as rage and revenge pushed rational thought aside. I immediately called our attorney's office to get a recommendation for a divorce attorney. After receiving the names of 2 attorneys who specialize in divorce, I called one of them and made an appointment to meet with him the next day. I then called our bank, stockbroker, and insurance agent to make an appointment for the next day to begin the financial separation from Sarah. The emotional detachment was much more difficult and traumatic. I had loved Sarah for many years, and it was hard to disconnect as quickly as the material connection. It was hard for me to understand why she did this, but I assumed that sometime during the divorce proceedings, we would have a chance to talk, and she would tell me the reasons why. It could probably be attributed to some extent to her rowdy days in college when she couldn't settle down and have sex in her marriage. Maybe I'll never know. I always thought she was satisfied with me as a lover, husband, and father, but I guess I missed something. So here I am, trying to cope with a cheating wife who has children I didn't father. The next day was a busy day for me. I went to the bank and started closing credit cards, closing and opening accounts to divide our funds, and then went to our stockbrokers to do the same. Then I went to an insurance agent to exclude Sarah and the kids from being my beneficiaries, and finally to the attorneys to change the will. The whole time I was doing this, they threw sad looks at me and shook their heads, but no one questioned my decision. I was doing what I was legally entitled to do, so nothing could be said. When I went to my divorce lawyers, I was tired but ready for the final step. I laid out my case to him and told him what I wanted. Mr. Irwin, did you take the time to talk to your wife about this? No, I can't face her without possibly physically harming her. I just want a quick divorce without alimony. Let her sue the father of her children for child support, and she makes as much as I do in some years, so there should be no alimony. It sounds like you have proof of her infidelity, since these reports say you are essentially infertile. But that can't be proof if you want to seek a divorce based on adultery. DNA testing would support your claims. But if you don't want to wait for that, you can use irreconcilable differences as a reason. If he's fast, that's what I need, but I don't need additional tests to confirm it in my mind, exclaimed I in righteous indignation. Okay, I'll prepare the paperwork and file it tomorrow morning. It should be ready for filing tomorrow afternoon. Sounds good, I told him, getting ready to leave. Before I left, I told him where Sarah worked and when she would be home to meet Betsy and Jason from school so they would know where to find her. I left the lawyer's office feeling terribly sad. The euphoria and excitement I had felt that morning about getting revenge on Sarah seemed to have evaporated. It dawned on me that I had just cut myself off from the children I had raised and the family I had cherished for so long. As I was getting into my car, my cell phone rang, and I checked to see who it was before answering it. It was Sarah, so I just sent the phone to voicemail. Her voice was a little upset and concerned. "Bill, what's going on? I tried to use our joint credit card and it was declined. Do you know anything about this? I tried calling your room in Omaha, but they said you checked out the day before yesterday. Where are you? Please call, honey. I'm afraid something's happened." Here we go, I thought, deleting her message and turning off his phone. It's only going to get worse from here. I couldn't shake the sadness that hung over me like a black cloud as I drove back to his motel. The feeling didn't leave me for the rest of the day, and that night, I had trouble falling asleep. The next morning, I called my foreman at the construction site and informed him that I was back in town and would be out to see him later that morning. I decided that I would have to get a new phone with a different number so I could keep working while avoiding Sarah. I pulled over and took care of that right after breakfast and threw the old phone in the glove compartment. Once there, I checked on the progress of the work and then decided to head home and move in while Sarah was at work and the kids were at school. I needed to find a furnished apartment quickly so I had somewhere to live. Before I left, I gave the foreman my new phone number and asked him not to give it to Sarah. When I pulled up to the house, I found that Sarah's car was gone. So I pulled into the garage and went inside to gather the things I would need for the first time. We had a property division to go through before our material possessions could be finalized. I was in our bedroom, packing clothes into the 2 suitcases I had taken from the attic, when I heard a voice behind me. "Weren't you even going to say goodbye?" Sarah came home to pick up some forgotten papers and caught me. I was shocked. I hadn't planned our meeting yet. "Hi, Sarah. I didn't expect you to be home." "Obviously, Bill," she replied wryly. "Now are you going to tell me what's going on?" I tried calling until I ran out of battery on my cell phone, but now I want an answer. I thought I'd better get it over with. "Sarah, remember before I left for Omaha, we talked about me having to get a vasectomy?" "Yes, I remember." "Well, while I was in Omaha, I decided to surprise you and do it there since I found out it was such a simple and painless procedure. Before the surgery, the doctor took a sperm sample from me and discovered that I was infertile. Needless to say, I was shocked. How could I have 2 children and be infertile? I went back to town early and had another test here, which confirmed the Omaha test results. Now tell me, who is the father of our children? I'd really like to know." "I suspect it's Drew, or maybe you didn't keep track because you thought you were back in college," I said with a chuckle. Her face turned red as she listened to my story. And when I finished, she screamed at me. "These children have only one father. You. I have never been unfaithful to you. Before we got married, we promised to be faithful to each other, and I've never had another man but you. Then how can a barren guy have kids? And why was Drew here last night and not leave? I don't know why you're infertile. Have you talked to the doctor? Remy was here last night, not Drew. You know how nervous I get at night when you're gone. And then there's thunder and lightning, so she came over and slept in the guest room. Why didn't you tell me she was here when I called at night? I didn't want you to think I was such a big baby that I needed someone around for support. I was beginning to feel like I was overreacting to this whole situation. But as befits a husband, I couldn't give up without a fight. Hell, why talk to a doctor? As far as I know, you're either sterile or you're not. I got over the mumps when I was a kid, and I guess that's what caused it. That means I've always been infertile and wasn't the father of your children. Well, get used to the fact that these are your children, because no one else has ever been inside me, and it wasn't an immaculate conception. I was confused. We were yelling at each other, and my throat was sore too. Okay, let's calm down. There has to be a good reason for this. I said it in what I hoped was a conciliatory tone. Right now we're going to pick up the kids from school, go down to the clinic, and take DNA samples from you and them. When that's done, we're going to go to Dr. Klein and ask him to explain how you can be sterile and still have children. But make no mistake, Buster, these are your children. It certainly didn't sound like someone who was lying or bluffing. And I started to feel sick at the thought that I'd jumped to a conclusion I couldn't support in an argument. I obediently followed her to the car and sat in silence as we drove to pick up the kids. The school said nothing as we picked up Betsy and Jason and headed to the clinic. It was obvious that Sarah was upset because her lips were tightly pressed together, and she drove with grim determination. The children were confused about what was happening, but they knew something was wrong, so they didn't say anything. I took the kids to the clinic to get DNA samples, and Sarah called Doc Klein's office on her cell phone to get a chance to speak briefly with the doctor. She knew the receptionist and was able to carve out 15 minutes that afternoon. The clinic told me that the test results wouldn't be ready until 2 days later, but I was beginning to think that it would be a foregone conclusion that Betsy and Jason were mine. As I studied them, I noticed a very distinct family resemblance that I hadn't paid much attention to before. After dropping the kids off at school, we drove to my house without speaking. I wanted to say something, but she just said we'd talk when we got home. Things were starting to look pretty grim, and I was going to be the one to blame, even though I felt like I had behaved appropriately under the circumstances. If only she hadn't been so sure the kids were mine. When we got home, she parked the car in the driveway and left it there. I followed her into the house, but did not say anything, as I did not want to stir up unnecessary talk until the matter was resolved. "We need to talk," she stated emphatically and headed for the kitchen. Sitting down at the table facing each other, she began. "Bill, do you want a divorce?" I thought for a moment before answering. If it turns out the kids aren't mine and you've been unfaithful to me, then the answer is yes. But at the same time, if it turns out to be a terrible mistake, then no, I don't want a divorce. That sounds fair. But it bothers me that you automatically assumed I was unfaithful and started divorce proceedings without talking to me. It seems to me that you were just looking for an excuse to leave this marriage and this family. I knew I had to be careful. It would be a few more days before the DNA test results confirmed my stupidity, and I didn't want to ruin our relationship any more than I already had. It was time for some sweet talk. "Sarah, I may not say this often, but I love you very much and can't imagine my life without you and the kids. When I found out I was infertile, I guess I must have been a little confused and made a mess of things without thinking about the consequences. In hindsight, I should have waited and talked to you before taking any action. Let's talk to the doctor this afternoon and see if he can come up with a logical explanation for my infertility, and then we'll move forward. You can't imagine how devastated I was when I thought that you cheated on me and that Betsy and Jason were not my children. I ask you to forgive me for not talking to you first." She sat and listened to me as I spoke, but I could see her start to relax a little when I was done. "Okay, let's have lunch and then we'll head to the doctor's." She didn't say anything else, but began to prepare dinner. I knew she was withholding judgment for now, and I hoped that was a good sign as we ate in silence. Shortly after arriving at the doctor's office, we were ushered into one of his exam rooms. When the doctor joined us, I told him that I had learned that I was infertile and showed him the results of my semen analysis. I then told him that my wife claimed that I was the father of our children. He took a quick look at the test results and then looked at my medical records. "If you are the father of your children, there must have been some event or disease after they were born that affected sperm production," the doctor noted. "Do you remember any incidents that may have affected your testicles since then?" Suddenly, Sarah spoke up. "Remember last summer when you were playing softball with your team from work? You were playing shortstop and they threw you a ball that bounced unluckily and hit you right in the crotch. You weren't wearing a heel pad, and you were in pain in your groin for a week afterward. I tried to talk you into going to the doctor, but you wouldn't go." I suddenly remembered the incident and was immediately stunned that I hadn't thought of it during everything that had happened in the past few days. Oh my God, that could have been it. I didn't even think about it. What a stupid asshole I am. Could that have caused my problem, Doc? It could have caused damage to the tubes that carry sperm to the testicles, or damage to the vein that cools the blood in the testicles, or a combination of both. We will have to do testing to determine the cause. But yes, this incident may have made you infertile. It may partially correct itself over time. "Oh my God," I groaned. "What have I done?" Sarah just sat there looking at me. Epilogue. DNA tests confirmed that Betsy and Jason were mine. I also had a vasectomy just in case. In time, Sarah forgave me. Perhaps because of this incident, she realized that I was very intolerant of infidelity on her part. Of course, I kept it a secret for quite a while, until she decided that she wanted to keep me around. The most embarrassing part of the whole incident was that I had to go back and correct the changes in our financial situation. I think some of the ladies at the bank and insurance office guessed why I wanted to get our accounts back to the way they were and couldn't resist a satisfied smirk. The only thing I'm really thankful for is not voicing my suspicions to my buddy Drew. I can only hope that Sarah never tells Remy what I did.